Questions, questions orales. L'honorable député.
Gentleman member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Madam Speaker, we learned this morning that Quebec is demanding a refund of nearly $300 million from the federal government for receiving illegal migrants. If the Prime Minister hasn't understood this yet, it's urgent his government finally solve the problem at our borders, a problem of his own creation. If he doesn't do anything, the bills will keep piling up. When will he do so, and what will he say to the government of Quebec, which should not have to pay for the Prime Minister's mistakes? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration. Madam Speaker, we have committed $36 million initially to deal with the problem in Quebec. We're also issuing work permits on an expedited basis so that migrants can work while awaiting a decision. Madam Speaker, Canadians expect various levels of government to cooperate to meet their legal obligations and ensure law and order and safety, and that is what we will continue to do. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Madam Speaker, what's clear is that the provinces cannot respect the Prime Minister's decision not to do anything. He created the problem himself. Quebec has a $300 million bill for the years past. Quebec should not have to pay for the Prime Minister's mistakes and failures. Will the government reimburse the government of Quebec today? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, it's imperative that people making refugee claims here are entitled to a proper procedure that is consistent with the law. The idea that this problem was created by a single tweet by the Prime Minister is nonsense. We had a productive meeting with our Quebec counterparts to discuss further, and the Quebec Minister, and I would like to repeat that we have already earmarked $36 million to come to Quebec's assistance.
Parliamentary Budget Officer pegged the cost of the Prime Minister's illegal border crossing crisis at a staggering $1.1 billion. Today, Quebec confirmed that the crisis has cost its taxpayers $300 million since last year. This is in addition to the $200 million Ontario is demanding to cover their costs, cost estimates that the PBO concluded are completely reasonable. Why has the Prime Minister failed to take concrete action to end this crisis by not closing the loophole of the Safe Third Country Agreement?
The Honourable Minister of Border Security and Organised Crime Reduction.
The member ought to know the Safe Third Country Agreement is a bilateral agreement between ourselves and the United States. There have been ongoing discussions between our two governments with respect to improving and enhancing the existing agreement. And while those discussions take place, we can maintain our commitment to ensure the Canadian law is upheld, the security of the country is maintained, and that we are working closely with the provinces that are impacted by this influx. And I also want to acknowledge the excellent work done in the City of Montreal and the City of Toronto by their officials.
The member for Barrie-Innisfil.
Well, what the minister ought to know is that this is a problem that his government created. It's not fair that taxpayers in Ontario and Quebec must foot the bill for a crisis their governments didn't create and don't have the power to fix. It's not fair that the crisis is causing years-long and processing delays at the Immigration and Refugee Board for the world's most vulnerable, who are fleeing violence and persecution, but who choose to enter Canada legally. When will the Prime Minister take action to restore fairness and order to Canada's asylum system that he has broken?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I'd simply point out that there is a global migration of literally tens of millions of people who are fleeing war and persecution around the world, and every country is being impacted by this. Madam Speaker, and in addition, the suggestion that a tweet has impacted an international phenomenon is, quite frankly, absurd. I would encourage the member to perhaps become better informed of this issue around the world.
A member for Barrie-Innisfil.
Last time we checked, Madam Speaker, there wasn't a war going on in upstate New York. This is a failure of epic proportions, a social and financial debacle that is damaging Canada's reputation as safe refuge for the world's most vulnerable, with a fair, compassionate, orderly, and legal immigration and refugee system. The Prime Minister needs to fix this mess he's created. But in the meantime, he can't keep downloading the cost of illegal border crossers onto the provinces. When will the Prime Minister finally take some responsibility? Why should the taxpayers of Ontario and Quebec pay for his crisis?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, let me tell you what we will not do. We will not do what the Conservatives did during their tenure when 230,000 people came to this country seeking asylum. And what did they do, Madam Speaker? They cut the budget of CBSA and they cut the budget of those agencies and departments responsible for managing this migration. And then, Madam Speaker, they went a step further. They cut health care for those same individuals, for those families and for those and for their children. A move that our courts described as cruel and unusual.
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Speaker, today the UN Committee Against Torture released a report confirming what we've known all along. Indigenous women continue to be coerced into sterilization in Canada. This is sickening. While the Liberal government continues to speak their empty talking points, Indigenous women in this country are still subjected to the harm of ongoing colonialism and systemic discrimination. This is simply wrong. When will the Liberal government put a stop to the savage act of robbing Indigenous women of their dignity, health, and their humanity?
Honourable member, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Madam Speaker, the coerced sterilization of Indigenous women is clearly a violation of human rights. Our Minister of Indigenous Services met with one of the senators yesterday to further discuss this issue. To date, our government is ensuring that every mother knows that she is entitled to an escort during childbirth. We are investing in services such as the maternal child health program to support healthy pregnancies and healthy births. We are investing for the first time in midwifery, and we are implementing all of the TRC's calls to action. We will continue ongoing work with all of our partners to improve access to culturally safe healthcare services and support.
Member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, Madam Speaker, that's not all. Here's some more bad news. Yesterday, the Liberals rejected a resolution passed by the First Nations chiefs to amend the criminal code to outlaw sterilization. How can this be truth and reconciliation? The UN Committee Against Torture has confirmed that Canada is guilty of torturing Indigenous women by forced sterilization. Do the Liberals not understand that this is a stain on our country, a stain on every one of us in this House? Why are the Liberals tolerating forced sterilization of Indigenous women?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, forced sterilization of any woman is absolutely unacceptable. Our government believes firmly that everyone must receive culturally safe health services no matter where they live. The coerced sterilization of Indigenous women is a serious violation of human rights and is completely unacceptable. We are taking a public health approach to this issue as outlined by the Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous Services. We're investing in public health approaches in Indigenous communities. The existing provisions in the criminal code do capture a broad range of criminal behaviour, including coerced sterilization. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Madam Speaker, the government boasts about its record, but the facts are quite different. The UN Committee Against Torture has released a report confirming that Indigenous women continue to be forcibly sterilized here in Canada. In 2018, the Prime Minister keeps saying his most important relationship is with Indigenous people, and yet nothing is being done to truly protect the Indigenous women. Is this government going to do something to put an end to these dehumanizing practices? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services. The forced sterilization of certain Indigenous women is a human rights violation. We know that Indigenous people face systemic discrimination and racism, and we are doing everything we can to ensure that Indigenous patients receive proper healthcare services without discrimination that are culturally adapted in keeping with the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to come back to the question the comment the parliamentary secretary made. He said that they're content with the current provisions of the criminal code, but we can see that that's a failure because the criminal code as it currently stands is not stopping this aberrant practice from taking place in Canada. The chiefs of the First Nations said that they passed a resolution, and we can't in good conscience remain silent in the face of such injustice. When will the government address this problem and put an end to this unacceptable situation? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, we fully agree with the party opposite. The current situation is totally unacceptable. Not just with respect to Indigenous women, but any women in Canada facing forced sterilization. The provisions of the criminal code already capture this type of situation, all kinds of criminal behavior.
With respect to Indigenous women, which has been highlighted, which needs to be addressed and will be addressed. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Madam Speaker, last week the Minister of Natural Resources questioned the intelligence of anyone who thinks that it was the Liberals that killed Northern Gateway. Well, of course it was the Liberals, Madam Speaker. They killed it with a shipping ban and a ministerial order. The Prime Minister had always opposed Northern Gateway in opposition, and when he became Prime Minister, he killed it. Now they want to kill all future pipelines with the No More Pipelines Bill, C-69. So will this minister apologize for questioning people's intelligence and kill Bill C-69?
The honourable member for Minister for Natural Resources.
Let's share some good news. What is happening in Alberta today? Alberta gained 36,500 new full-time jobs in the month of November. This month was the largest single month full-time job gains in Alberta on the record. As far as Northern Gateway is concerned, Madam Speaker, it was the Court of Appeal that overturned the decision made by the previous government under a flawed process that they followed.
The honourable member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Madam Speaker, Bill C-69 heaps additional regulation and uncertainty on Canada's resource and energy sectors. This Liberal government policies are driving investors completely out of this country. It has a devastating effect on investor confidence, especially in my province of Saskatchewan and next door in Alberta. When will this Liberal government stand up to the Canadian energy sector and kill this Bill C-69?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Madam Speaker, we are focused on fixing a flawed process that led to a number of pipelines being not moving forward. 99% of Alberta's oil is sold to one single customer, which is the United States. That was the case under the previous government because they failed to build a single pipeline to non-U.S. markets because they had a process in place that's so flawed. We are trying to fix that, and the focus of Bill 669 is to do exactly that, put a better process in place so we can move forward on building pipelines.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Madam Speaker, my constituents are sick and tired of this Liberal government. They're sick and tired of exploding deficits. They're sick and tired of tax hikes. They're sick and tired of attacks on our way of life. How much further are these Liberals prepared to go to alienate Canadians before they realize the damage they have done? When will they kill Bill C-69, the bill that will kill energy development in Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, our government's moving forward with a plan that's going to help protect the environment and grow the economy at the same time. That includes an overhaul of our environmental assessment process to restore the confidence that was lost under 10 years of Stephen Harper's government. Madam Speaker, during that 10 years, 99% of the resources that were extracted in our natural resource sector were going to the U.S., and after 10 years, it remained that way today. We're moving forward with a plan that's going to incorporate the feedback of Indigenous peoples, protect our environment, and I note in particular the Assembly of First Nations just gave a ringing endorsement to this approach.
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, the Liberals have had 4 years to get the job done, and they haven't done anything on pipelines. Today in my riding, families are struggling to make ends meet. Food banks are running low, And this month, families will choose between making their car payments or heating their homes. Now, the Prime Minister says that Canadians are better off under his plan, but his No More Pipelines bill, Bill C-69, is a threat to the livelihood of Canadians who work in the energy sector. When will the Liberals finally put families first and kill Bill C-69?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, let me take the opportunity to correct the honourable member. We approved Enbridge Line 3. That is underway now. That will add 370,000 barrels per day capacity to get our resources to the U.S. On top of that, we are moving forward in responding to the court's decision on Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in the right way, making sure that we are responding to the issues of marine safety, making sure that we are responding in a meaningful way to engage with Indigenous communities to deal with their concerns.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Madam Speaker, 1.2 million barrels each day are flowing through pipelines approved by Conservatives. It's 0 new barrels for the Liberals. Today, the Prime Minister is meeting with the Premiers. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and New Brunswick all want a west-to-east pipeline to bring Canadian oil to Canadian refineries and export to Europe. But the Liberals' No More Pipelines bill is standing in the way and will harm the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of Canadians. So will the Liberals finally at least listen to the Premiers and scrap their No More Pipelines bill C-69?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to take this question on today of all days. I know that in particular, Statistics Canada reported this morning that the Canadian economy has added 94,000 new jobs in just the past month. One of the reasons that we're seeing this is because we're implementing smart economic policies, because we recognize that we can grow the economy and protect the environment at the same time. That's why we're moving with an overhaul of an environmental assessment process to ensure that projects move forward in the right way. After 10 years of governance under Stephen Harper, Canadians lost faith that the environment would be protected and rejected development projects on that basis. We are moving forward with a plan that's going to see our economy grow and our environment protected.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
I asked the Minister of Natural Resources, and he should answer my questions. The fact is that almost 500,000 barrels per day flow to new markets through pipelines approved by Conservatives. More than 8,000 kilometres of pipelines were built under Conservatives, while these Liberals, they've already blocked 7,000 kilometres of pipelines, and they haven't added a single new inch. The Bank of Canada governor says the value of Canada's oil and gas sector shrunk by 42% since the Liberals were elected. That's a crisis they created, and their No More Pipelines Bill C-69 will cripple the industry. Will they scrap the No More Pipelines Bill C-69?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is appropriate that the member should know that one of the pipelines they cite as being built under their tenure was actually built in 1976. All they did was reverse the flow of the pipeline. If that is their record, that clearly demonstrates how they have failed to get anything done. We are moving forward on building the pipeline capacity by approving the Enbridge Line 3, as well as moving forward on Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in the right way.
Bravo. The honourable member for Victoria.
According to a Department of Public Safety report, fully 86% of participants agreed the government should completely wipe out, not merely suspend, criminal records for minor offences, particularly convictions for cannabis possession. 500,000 Canadians have criminal records for this. They continue to face significant barriers to employment and housing for an activity that's now entirely legal. These Canadians deserve freedom, not forgiveness. Will the Liberals commit to expunging criminal records for cannabis possession?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his advocacy on this issue and this question. Removing the stigma of a criminal record for people who have shown themselves to be law-abiding citizens and encouraging their reintegration enhances public safety for all Canadians. Individuals who have previously criminalized for simple possession of cannabis should be allowed meaningful participation in their communities, good, stable jobs, and become fully contributing members of society. That's why the Government of Canada intends to offer specific recourse, allowing individuals to immediately apply for pardon after completing their sentence and making it free to apply.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Yesterday, I stood in Parliament with leaders from the John Howard Society. They said pardons do not provide enough protection for people with criminal records. They said this: if people's convictions are expunged rather than pardoned, they'll be able to respond no to any questions about their criminal history, no matter how the question's phrased. The government admits Black and Indigenous Canadians have been disproportionately burdened with criminal records for possession. The application of this law has been fundamentally unjust. So will the government do what's just by erasing their records?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, pardon's a very effective tool. It's cheaper, it's faster, there is no fee, there is no wait time, the record is sealed and segregated, and it can only be reopened only in extraordinary circumstances, such as committing another offence. The effect of a pardon is protected by the Canadian Human Rights Act. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Carleton.
The honourable member for Carleton.
This government has given Canadians a wage cut. The data out just today shows that inflation is rising twice as fast as wage growth. And that's before the average tax increase of $800 for a Canadian family. And then in January, the carbon tax will take effect. That will add, in the short term, 11 cents a litre to gas, $250 to a home heating bill. Will the government tell us what will be the full price of the carbon tax when it is completely implemented in the year 2022?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, the report to which the honourable member refers actually points out that 94,000 new jobs were added to the Canadian economy just last month. That brings the total of full-time jobs up to almost 700,000 since we took office. At the same time we're growing the economy, we are moving forward with a plan to protect our environment that will put a price on pollution, the details of which are transparent and on our website, that will actually leave middle-class families better off. If the honourable member doesn't accept the answer from me, I suggest he talks to Stephen Harper's former Director of Policy, who can confirm that this is the case.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Accept, Madam Speaker. The report he talked about today shows that wages only went up 1.2% while inflation is 2.4%. In other words, the cost of living is rising twice as fast as wages, which is a real wage cut for Canadians. Furthermore, the carbon tax will add additional costs onto Canadians. This government admits that it will bring in a new carbon tax price in the year 2022, only a few years from now. How much will that tax cost in higher gas and home heating prices for struggling Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I've watched this honourable member for months try to trick Canadians into thinking there's going to be an increased cost as a result of our plan. We are implementing a plan that will actually result in a net benefit to middle-class families, Madam Speaker. When we're moving forward with a plan, it's actually a feature of our federal law that this money goes back into the pockets of families. And I will watch very closely in the next campaign when this honourable member campaigns on a commitment to take that money from the families in his community.
The honourable member for Oshawa.
Madam Speaker, auto companies will build the electric and autonomous cars of the future, but sadly not in Oshawa. Twice this week, Liberals refused to let MPs study this very important issue. Twice this week, the Prime Minister was asked to release his plan for affected auto workers in Oshawa. Again, Madam Speaker, nothing. And it's been 2 weeks and the Prime Minister still hasn't even bothered to call Oshawa's mayor to offer his support. So for the third time this week, will the Prime Minister release his plan for affected auto workers before Christmas? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development.
Madam Speaker, as we've mentioned a number of times in this House, our sympathies go out to workers in Oshawa and everyone else affected by this closure. We're disappointed in the closure, but we have assured the people of Ottawa that we will look at every possibility and work with General Motors and any other company moving forward. Madam Speaker, as far as investments in the auto industry go, as far as the car of the future goes, the future for Ontario is bright and promising. GM has invested in Markham, Madam Speaker, and we will continue to work with all automakers and everyone in the industry, the artificial intelligence industry, to ensure the auto of the future.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Thank you, Speaker. The Minister of Innovation has had nearly 2 years to review EORN's broadband network proposal. 25% of Eastern Ontario homes and businesses cannot access broadband services. Business investment and retention, job creation, education, healthcare, basically the overall quality of life of residents in my riding depend on access to reliable, high-speed internet and cellular service. Will the Minister confirm that rural broadband and cellular service is a top priority, and what he is doing to work with the province to ensure that this gets done?
The vote time. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, broadband connectivity, cell connectivity remains a top priority for this government. Through our Connect to Innovate program, we've invested $500 million, Madam Speaker, across Canada, and that leveraged other investments in that industry. We've managed with 180 projects, Madam Speaker, to connect more than 900 rural communities across Canada. That's many more than the 300 communities initially targeted, including 190 Indigenous communities. Madam Speaker, we invested $10 million in Eastern Ontario to connect 21 communities, including one Indigenous community, and 38 institutions. So we are living up, Madam Speaker, to our promises of connecting.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Madam Speaker, the Liberals promised compensation to agricultural producers. Well, surprise, surprise, they've announced another lottery for producers. The demonstrations today are proof that this is not enough. Anything seems to go. And how can you be sure to get a spot when you don't have fast enough internet? Only 1,000 to 1,500 projects will be approved, while 6,500 farms in Quebec and 17,000 in the country are seriously affected. Liberals have not understood a thing. Will they finally listen to the producers' demands, yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. $350 million in support to producers and processors throughout Canada will be provided. We've already started helping producers in improving their productivity and their competitiveness and their ability to adapt to the agreement. To date, we have provided more than $129 million to 129,000 producers throughout the country. And the second phase of the program will be open for applications at the beginning of next year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Langford.
Madam Speaker, last week the Liberals promised they wouldn't agree to the U.S. oversight clause in the USMCA, but sure enough, they signed the agreement with the clause included. American oversight of our Canadian dairy system undermines our food sovereignty and betrays our farmers. This is the third time Liberals have signed an agreement giving away access to our domestic dairy market, and now Americans can dictate our dairy policies. Is this government unable to keep its promises, or do they just not care about our farmers, producers, and supply management system?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government has defended our supply management system from strong American attempts to see it dismantled. We worked hard to advance Canadian agricultural interests at the table. We understand there will be impacts on our farmers, and we're committed to fully and fairly supporting them to help them continue to succeed. The dairy working groups have been announced. They will develop strategies to fully and fairly support producers and processors and ensure the sector can innovate, grow, and remain competitive and sustainable for future generations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member,
The Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Madam Speaker, in 2015, Canadians, after 10 years of cuts, were faced with a clear choice. Continue the austerity approach that cut jobs, continue the tax breaks that only benefited the rich.
Better choice. We invested in hard-working Canadians to support and create opportunities for the middle class and those working every day to join it.
Can the Parliamentary Secretary tell the House how our plan will benefit Canadian workers? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Hull-Aylmer. It's true that for 10 years under the Conservatives, we saw the worst economic results in almost all areas over that decade. The Conservatives still have no plan for the economy, but We have had very encouraging reports.
Jobs that have been created in this country, and the unemployment rate, Madam Speaker, fell to 5.6%, the lowest level recorded. More Canadians are working, our economy is the strongest in the G7, and because of our plan, the average Canadian family will have $2,000 more.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Speaker, another day, another ally taking a stand against Huawei with the news that Japan will ban them from government contracts. BT in the UK is also removing all Huawei tech from their existing mobile network. For months, we have been asking the government to stand with Canadians and protect their cybersecurity. Why do the Liberals keep refusing to do the right thing, ban Huawei from our next generation of 5G technology?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Science, Innovation and Economic Development.
The government takes the security of Canada's telecommunications networks very seriously. We've invested more than $725 million to fund a new national cybersecurity strategy to ensure secure and resilient cyber systems and encourage innovation. The Communication Security Establishment, Madam Speaker, has provided advice and guidance on the 4G network, and they will continue to do so on the 5G network. Together with Canadian international partners, Canada's National Security Agency are constantly working to identify threats and will continue to listen to their advice. Thank you.
The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Madam Speaker, if the Liberals want us to believe that they take cybersecurity of Canadians seriously, they should just simply take action and ban Huawei. Chinese law demands that this company cooperate with the Chinese government and spy on Canadians. How many more allies and experts have to raise this as a crisis before the government does the right thing and bans Huawei from our 5G network?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development.
Once again, let me reiterate and reassure everyone in this House as well as Canadians that we will never compromise our national security. We will listen to our national security agencies, we will take their advice, and we will move forward. Balanced with that, Madam Speaker, is the fact that we are investing in telecommunications services, which we promised Canadians we would do in order to improve quality coverage and services no matter where they live. 5G is an important part of that picture. Madam Speaker, we'll take the advice of our national security agencies, who will give us the same kinds of advice on 5G that they did on 4G.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Madam Speaker, in June, this House voted in favour of our motion to label the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist entity. It has been reported that one of the RGC commanders had been ordering hit squads to kill politicians in Iraq that the Iranian regime disapproves of. At the same time, they are holding a Canadian permanent resident in a notorious prison, despite the regime's own acknowledgement that there is no evidence. Why haven't the Liberal have listed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist entity?
The honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We will always defend human rights and hold Iran to account for its actions. The focus of any discussions we have with the government of Iran are ensuring that equitable and just returns are ensuring that we maintain the focus on human rights and make sure that those citizens who are unjustly detained are returned. Our government is committed to holding Iran to account for its violations of human and democratic rights. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Montmagny-Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I had the pleasure of going to Abitibi last week, where many stakeholders in Rouyn-Noranda and Val-d'Or and many other areas shared their concerns about NAV Canada's plan to eliminate night air traffic controllers for our area. Could the minister reassure the people of Abitibi and tell them clearly that they will not allow NAVCAN to put their safety in the hands of robots just to save a little bit of money, Madam Speaker?
To the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you to my colleague for the question. The safety and security of our transportation area is a priority. Transport Canada is working with NAVCAN on this file to ensure that all operations of the airports are secure. NAVCAN is currently doing a second round of consultations with the communities, and no decision has been made on this file yet, but there is no question of cancelling nighttime flights.
Mr. West.
The CRTC has launched proceedings to create an Internet Code of Conduct to protect consumers. The problem is, without warning and little notice, they have put the public and experts on an impossible timeline to contribute meaningful input. Even worse, the CRTC is withholding crucial information to allow experts to do their job. The CRTC's irrational approach has become a debacle. Are the Liberals really serious about consumer protection, or is this process smoke and mirrors? Will the minister extend the deadline to allow the public and experts reasonable time to make submissions to the CRTC and ensure a code of conduct is done properly?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. The CRTC has a long track record, Madam Speaker, of consulting Canadians and of working well within the areas of its jurisdiction, including telecommunications and consumer protection. We have every confidence, Madam Speaker, that it will continue to do so. The minister is aware of this process, and we will continue to watch it. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. I have a very specific question. Yesterday, the leaders of the NDP, the Bloc and the Green Party came together to extend a hand to the entire House of Commons because it is time to recognize the dire urgency of climate change. We don't have time to argue. We have to set aside partisanship and put in a war effort to combat climate change. No single party can tackle this challenge alone. We have to come together and send a non-partisan message which could make all the difference. Will the Prime Minister accept to work in a non-partisan way with the other parties and call a leaders' summit to tackle climate change? People are watching. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank the honourable member for the question. I'm pleased that just this past week had the opportunity to join him and others from different parties at the All-Party Climate Change Caucus meeting. Madam Speaker, I note in particular that we're sending a delegation to Poland with representatives from different parties as well. But while we're establishing a way to move forward, we are working on a plan that's actually going to protect our environment for future generations. We are phasing out coal more than 30 years ahead of schedule compared to the last government's plan. We're putting a price on pollution. We're investing in clean technology, making historic investments in public transit, and implementing over 50 measures that are going to make a meaningful difference so we can ensure our environment is protected for our kids and grandkids.
Our member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister admitted that he knew in advance about the arrest of a Huawei executive. In other words, he was briefed. But yet the PM expects Canadians to believe he had no idea the RCMP were conducting an investigation into one of its own MPs. An MP whose name turned up on wiretaps regarding terrorist financing and drug money laundering. Will the Prime Minister come clean and admit that he failed to act after being briefed on an MP within his caucus being linked to organized crime?
The Honourable Leader of the Government.
Mr. Speaker, that member, as all members have been informed, the RCMP works independently of government. Government does not direct the RCMP or security agencies to take on investigations. We appreciate their independence and we appreciate the work that they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister's claims that he was not aware of the RCMP's investigation into one of his Liberal members on drug money laundering and terrorism financing simply does not stand up. Madam Speaker, if the Prime Minister says he was informed about the imminent arrest of Huawei board members, then when was he informed of the investigation into the member for Brampton East? The Honourable Government House Leader. Madam Speaker, we have already answered this question. The member must be aware that the RCMP works independently from the government. We on this side of the House respect their work and their independence. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Madam Speaker, parliamentary immunity serves the purposes of the Liberals when they want to avoid answering simple, legitimate questions. Canadians' expectation of their government is that their member and minister be immune to any corruption at all. Madam Speaker, what are the connections between the trip to India, the real estate developer, the minister and the member for Brampton East, all of this overseen by the Prime Minister's office? The Honourable Government House Leader. Madam Speaker, the member is mixing up issues and he's doing it on purpose. That is not the way to work in this House. The member knows full well that the RCMP works independently. The minister has answered these questions as well. And it's easy to know whether or not the Conservatives are asking real questions because they're not saying the same things outside the House. The leader of the opposition actually retracted comments he made outside the House, but he continues to put these questions in the House where he's protected.
Madam Speaker, we know that working collaboratively to renew the relationship based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation and partnership is key to achieving reconciliation and moving forward on self-determination for our Indigenous peoples in Canada. The assertion of jurisdiction over education is just one step towards self-determination, and it is vital for communities to be able to teach their children in a way that underscores the importance of their culture and their language. Can the Parliamentary Secretary of Crown Indigenous Relations update this House on the efforts to accelerate self-determination for Indigenous peoples while closing the unacceptable education gap in our Indigenous communities?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Madam Speaker, I would like to thank the member from Long Range Mountains for a question. Our government is committing to advancing self-determination and ensuring that First Nation students have access to culturally appropriate, high-quality education that meets their needs. The evidence is clear. First Nations-led education systems achieve better results for students. This week, the minister was honoured to sign an agreement in principle with the Anishinaabe Nation, which represents a major step forward to greater self-determination and a brighter future, most importantly, for their students.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. $1,000, $5,000, right up to $100,000. It's milk lottery time. The Liberal answer to European cheese imports. Here's how it works. Producer names go into a hat, and the lucky winners will get federal government assistance. And those who get a consolation prize on the first round of the program, your name gets taken out of the hat. Too bad, better luck next time. Madam Speaker, all producers will be affected by the concessions, and luck should have nothing to do with this. How can the Minister of Agriculture have accepted such a stupid, unfair program? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Madam Speaker, we have established a $350 million support for milk producers throughout the country. These programs have already started helping producers and processors to increase their productivity and their competitiveness and to adapt to this agreement. To date, we have put more than $129 million in the hands of over 1,000 producers throughout the country, including 876 producers in Quebec, for a total of $15 million. The second phase of the program will be open for applications at the beginning of the new year. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The honourable member for Lanty-Labelle. Madam Speaker, this week, during National Safe Driving Week, and during Operation Red Nose, the Conservatives are saying there's nothing wrong with having a few beers with your chicken wings before operating a motor vehicle. With the holidays fast approaching, can the Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction please inform the House what our government is doing to deter impaired driving? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister.
The Honourable Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction.
Speaker, I'd like to begin by thanking the member from Laurentides-Labelle for his important question, and I'd also like to acknowledge the outstanding work that he and his entire office performed with Operation Red Nose. Madam Speaker, tragically impaired driving remains the leading criminal cause of injury and death in Canada. And yet it is very clear that not everyone has gotten the message, and that's why it was particularly disappointing this week to hear the member from St. Albert, Edmonton, actually defending drinking and driving. Madam Speaker, our government is taking real action against impaired driving with the introduction of tough new measures, which have the support of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and Mothers Against Drink Driving.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Madam Speaker, 3 kilometres of the West Fraser Road in my riding has been washed out and impassable for 8 months. Over 250 Indigenous and non-Indigenous families are now put at risk. Children as young as 5 years of age are spending up to 5 hours per day on a school bus because this government can't get funding out the door. How is this acceptable for any government?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture.
For bringing this matter to our attention. Obviously, we're going to be looking at it. As you know, through our historic plan investment in infrastructure. I was in BC recently, Madam Speaker. I was in As Cannabis, we've been investing in British Columbia. We'll continue to invest, and I would invite the member to send me a note, and I'm quite happy to follow up with the member, because people in British Columbia know that we care for them. They know that we care for the children, obviously, of British Columbia, and we'll do a follow-up on that, Madam Speaker, to provide him an answer. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government isn't making sense. In the middle of COP24, when the entire world is organizing to tackle climate change, the Prime Minister is talking about buying 7,000 rail cars on the backs of taxpayers to export more tar sands oil. According to the lowest available public estimate, it would cost $840 million. Quebecers shouldn't have to put 1 cent into these oil cars when private companies are making so much profit on our backs. Will the government back down? The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Madam Speaker, we know that because of the price differential that we're facing in Alberta, there is a very dire situation that we need to deal with. So we're exploring all options that are in front of us, and we will continue to make sure that we do whatever action we take, we do it in the most safest and responsible way, keeping the safety of communities in mind as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member of Joliette. Well, Madam Speaker, according to the lowest available estimate, it will cost $840 million to taxpayers to give a gift of rail cars to oil companies who are amongst the richest in Canada. During that time, the government of Quebec has put out $300 million to take care of the migrants crisis that the federal government is just letting deteriorate. Does the government realize that what Quebec is asking for migrants is not even the minimum cost of these train cars? Will it compensate Quebec instead of giving gifts to oil sands companies?
Of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship.
Madam Speaker, it's important that we as a federal government work closely with our provincial counterparts, and that is what we are doing. It's what we're doing with the government of Quebec. On asylum seekers, we have already put $36 million into this along with the government of Quebec, and we will continue our conversations with them to make sure that asylum seekers are part of a system that leads to decisions that comply with our laws, and that's what we're talking about with the government of Quebec. The honourable member for Mirabel. Madam Speaker, after having bought a pipeline at the taxpayers' cost, the government now wants to buy rail cars for oil companies for Christmas. Meanwhile, our dairy producers are going to Montreal on their tractors to tell the Prime Minister that they'll be losing $450 million a year because of these 3 trade agreements. Does the government realize that half of what they're asking for is what's being given to these oil companies for rail cars? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Madam Speaker, we committed to fully and fairly supporting supply-managed producers to help them be successful. We have had working groups along with producers and processors, and with producers and processors of eggs. Together, we will help our producers and our supply-managed processors to innovate, grow, and remain competitive and sustainable for future generations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just as the world realizes that we have to leave fossil fuels in the ground, the Trump administration has its sights set on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Something about those words should have given Trump a hint that you're not supposed to drill there. It's the place where the porcupine caribou are essential for their birthing grounds, their calving grounds. It's essential for the Gwich'in people on both sides of our border. What has the government of Canada done to stand in the way of Donald Trump and his blind rush to develop the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and as always, it's a pleasure to discuss these issues with the honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands. To start, it's important that we flag the priority that is nature and conservation. I note in Budget 2018 we've set aside $1.35 billion, a historic investment for our country in nature and conservation. With respect to the National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska, the regulatory process has not started yet, but Canada will take part, and our submissions will be a matter of the public record. In particular, we have established measures to protect the porcupine herd on our side of the border, including the creation of 2 national parks. Madam Speaker, we're moving forward with a plan to save the caribou for future generations.